Welcome everyone to this session on how eye tracking enables value in the businesses for developers and practitioners in XR. My name is Johan Bouvin. I am the director of XR ecosystem software here at Tobii. And I'm going to talk to you today about how eye tracking has been applied and utilized in successful businesses over the decades. I also want to talk to you how I see this transfer into the area of XR and have a little bit of a sneak peek into the future XR devices and what we can expect from those going forward. Eye tracking is proving foundational in XR at the moment. It is a core component in some of the best possible HMDs going forward. My colleague Doug Eggert just spoke about how you can expect this to roll out in XR HMDs going forward, because device manufacturers are including eye tracking as a standard in their devices. And eye tracking is also becoming part of the ongoing standardization work in the industry, led by, for example, Kronos Group with the OpenXR standards. So, in the simplest of terms, eye tracking is here. For those of you who don't know Tobii, we have been around for about 20 years focusing on eye tracking and its applications. Our vision has always been that eye tracking will become an integral part of all man-machine interfaces, simply because it gives such a broad channel of communication with utilizing eye gaze, both in terms of controlling our machines and in helping our machines understand us better. I've been part of the company almost from the start, and I took the liberty here today to do a little bit of research back and see how eye tracking has been applied and how I see that moving into the XR space in these days when eye tracking is coming into the headsets. Eye tracking per se has been around for quite a long time. It's probably close to 100 years since the first manual eye tracker started. Simply a picture with a hole in the middle and a physician observing a patient through that hole to see where the eyes moved. Then over time, these have become automated machines. First, very expensive ones for research and the like, but as time has gone on, and especially in the last 2 decades, eye tracking has made it into more and more affordable devices. And today, you'll find eye trackers integrated in consumer devices such as monitors, smartphones, laptops, and of course, VR HMDs. Tobii is today the world leader in providing eye tracking technologies for the industries. We are the ones that provide eye tracking into Alienware laptops. We provide it to HTC's Vive Pro Eye, and we're also super excited about the latest addition in consumer devices, which is the Pico Neo 2 Eye. Also, eye tracking from Tobii is integrated into future devices and in reference designs by Qualcomm that target those future devices, which is a really, really strong position, I think, to have going forward. These devices that you see here and the ones coming out, they include eye tracking because it brings value to developers and it brings value to practitioners. With eye tracking, you can create more immersive experiences and bring actionable insights into the fields of different types of analytics, diagnostics, and therapeutic applications. So eye tracking really is an integral part of the XR hardware, and it is also because it simply makes the device better. Eye tracking has a core role to play when a device manufacturer balances the varying needs for cost, power consumption, and processing power. One of the core ways eye tracking is utilized here is by driving foveated rendering, so the ability to focus graphics resources exactly on the small point where the eye is actually directing. This helps with battery time and GPU power, heat consumption, and those associated areas, and it does all this while enabling and maintaining the modern high-level graphical user experiences that we're all getting used to. And last but not least, as 5G enters the XR scene, having eye tracking is needed to run foveated video transport over the networks and really leverage the full capabilities of the edge. But today I want to talk mainly about the applications of eye tracking, and I want to focus on what eye tracking brings to the community of developers and practitioners in XR. And since eye tracking actually has become a feature that we can see in headsets, that's sort of undisputed, I thought it would be interesting to look back at the areas where eye tracking have been used previously outside XR and see how we can extrapolate that into the technology shift that we see happening in HMDs today. So if I look back at the areas where Tobii has been active and where eye tracking has been adopted over the last decades, gaming is probably the first one that comes to mind. Tobii eye tracking is supported in over 150 games today. Most of these come from the PC space where eye tracking has been adopted since quite a few years. But already now, even with the very few devices that we have had available lately, there are some VR titles coming out, which is super excited. And I know there's a bunch of colleagues of mine who eagerly got their hands on the new mods for Half-Life Alyx that were released by Valve not too far ago. So I'm really looking forward to see how that will develop as well. Secondly, but in some sense most importantly in very many ways, are the 60,000 voices eye tracking from Tobii has provided to people with various severe disabilities around the world. This area of application with eye tracking in communication devices and assistive technology, this is really a place that have led us to push the boundaries for using eye tracking as an input modality. We have done this very much in collaboration with other partners in the industry, and I'm very proud about the changes that Microsoft did last year, where they actually added eye tracking and gaze control as a core input modality into the Windows stack. I find that being a huge testament for the power of this as a input device. And as many of you know, what goes into the OSs as assistive technology quite often hits it broadly for all of us in due time. There is also a very profitable field that we've seen through the years of using eye tracking in training and in assessments, and actually in any application that looks at measuring human behavior of some sort. This particular example that you see here is from the real world, where eye tracking is used to train and find experts in a casting plant. Finally, it's impossible not to mention the recent explosion in remote collaboration applications. I'm sure that you have also seen a couple of interesting examples of new types of remote collaboration, both screen-based and in VR. And VR really does a good job of mimicking the real interactions in many ways, and live eye movements for Avatar has an amazing way of propelling the experience out of the uncanny valley. I really would have wanted to dive into all of these areas with you here today, but in the interest of time, I decided to focus on two of them that I find especially interesting here, given where we are in 2020 in general and where the XR industry is right now. Firstly, I want to look at the new ways of meeting remotely. Eye tracking is being adopted in remote collaboration as a way to create not only photorealistic but also video realistic avatars that feel like a real person. Secondly, I want to take a dive into existing enterprise markets that utilize eye tracking already today outside VR, the markets of training and design evaluation especially, and have a look at how we can expect those to continue to grow in VR, and as eye tracking now comes out in headsets, how I think that these applications will adopt the technology as well. But before I jump into the business applications, I would want to take a minute to do a little bit of promotion for Toby's XR Dev Zone and some of the showcases and starting points that I know have proven very, very valuable for any developers out there that want to dive into the new capabilities of upcoming headsets. On the Tobii Dev Zone, you'll find a comprehensive XR SDK that has proven very, very quick starting way for developers trying to apply eye tracking in various situations in XR. At Tobii, we're absolutely thrilled that the industry is picking this up, that developers out there are starting to experiment and integrate this into their experiences. And we thought we really should do our part here as well and share the experience that we have gotten and accumulated over the years by dog fooding our own technology. So what you'll find in these SDKs is really valuable tools, samples, showcases to get you kickstarted. And I highly encourage any developer out there who has a Vive Pro Eye or the new Pico Neo 2i to check these SDKs out. But first, in terms of enterprise applications, let's dive into remote collaboration. I would expect that there are many of you that, just like me, have spent more attention to this than you have previously. The VR scene has definitely seen its fair share of new collaboration applications, and some of the existing one has reignited. The Steam stats are quite impressive for VR chat and AltSpace VR, and a couple of those applications if you look at the first few months of this year. One particular application that we have worked with in my team is Vive Sync from the Vive team. I have really enjoyed the experience of seeing eye tracking applied in real avatars for the first time, and seeing what a great addition that is to the experience. I know I'm not the only one who have been very impressed with what the Vive team has done, and I actually had the chance to speak with David, who's leading the Vive team, about their experience the other day. I even managed to catch him on camera inside Vive Sync, so I will let David speak for this himself. Here he is.
Hey everyone. Welcome to Vive Sync. My name is David Sapienza and I run content production here at Vive. And we get asked all the time about eye tracking. How is it used? What are the best use cases? And I would say initially most people only think of eye tracking from their point of view. How would they, say, navigate a user interface with just their eye? Or how would they track whether they're looking at one thing versus another thing? But it's much more than that. In Sync, we actually apply it to our avatars. And the whole purpose of Sync was actually to bring teams together. So capturing a user's likeness, their face, was super important to us. In fact, we even built a full body IK system so we can communicate through body language. But once we enabled eye tracking, that's when we were able to not only communicate through body language, but also through our eyes. When we're having design meetings and one of my designers or artists, their eyes are darting left or darting right or up and down around an object, or I say something and someone just rolls their eyes, they're able to communicate to me without even saying a word. And in fact, I could even speak to the whole studio and I get a read of the room based on just the way the eyes are moving, if they're looking up in thought. So without question, I would say eye tracking has really enhanced the Sync avatars and made our whole experience and made communicating in VR much better. So I hope you guys give it a try and check it out for yourselves. And with that, I'll see you guys later.
Big thanks to David at ViveSync. If you look back at how avatar animation has been done in VR, you realize that the eye movement is actually a quite known problem that a lot of developers have experienced and handled in various ways. You can first of all show no eyes. That's what the Oculus team did in the very first avatars they had. They did a very, very solid job on what is a good avatar. And one of the conclusions was that you have to cover their eyes because otherwise they look really, really strange. That is true if you start having really humanoid avatars. You can avoid that in the way that Steam did in their avatars as well. You make cartoony avatars with big bulging eyes that are fixed straight forward, but they still look very friendly and happy as long as you do the cartoony part right. A couple of years later, Facebook and Oculus started doing more realistic avatars, still somewhat cartoony-like, but they added emulated eye movements into the mix. You can see on the one down here that the eye movements look reasonably good a large part of the time, but every once in a while you get a very weird feeling about a glance that goes completely the wrong direction. So that's really why the ViveSync avatars become so realistic. The change that gives, if you compare to the old ones, is absolutely amazing. And like David said, I highly recommend all of you to try out ViveSync if you have a chance. Referring back to our SDK on the Tobii Dev Zone, here is one of the samples you'll find in that package. Here we've hooked up blend shapes to the eye movements and drive both eye direction and some basic face movements with the eye tracking. And it looks pretty darn good just in that short clip as well. You can also, of course, in various interactions, turn the eye tracking around. In this clip here, you'll see how we drive a couple of non-player characters based on the eye gaze of the user. So the blue circle you see here is where the user is looking, and you're viewing the scene out of the user's perspective. And first of all, notice how the paranoid robot to the left is very attentive to gaze. The chilled one in the middle seems to know what's happening, but wants to hide their interest. But have a look at the awkward one on the right. This is sort of my favorite, actually, because he's looking at you all the time, except when we are looking at it. But again, the real magic in my mind happens when we gaze into the eyes of another person. I think the emotional response we get from that is something that we're so used to in our everyday interactions that we seem to take it for granted. But when you see it in VR, or rather when you see the absence of it in VR, then you really understand how fundamental eye contact is. So needless to say, one of the more powerful experiences we have on our dev zone as well is this short avatar scene. Just get in there, take a mirror and look at yourselves without eye tracking and with eye tracking. The difference is quite astonishing, actually. Moving on to the next application area of eye tracking, I want to talk a little bit about various enterprise applications and how eye tracking has been used historically, both outside VR and now lately inside VR. First of all, I want to mention our partner Wobbling, who is also speaking here in another session. They're part of the Bobbler group, and they work with serving large enterprises in creating custom digitized training programs for their employees. This here is an example of a safety inspection training for a large Scandinavian train operator. In this case, eye tracking brought this particular client a much higher level of security in what the training participants actually observe during the training, and that they don't just skip through it and attend. A second type of example that is very common is the area of immersive product design. Eye tracking has brought an objective tool to focus groups and collaboration about product design and product packaging design for a very, very long time. We even have our own group at Tobii that over the years have provided services to clients like this in the automotive industry to help them show really how their audience is perceiving their products. And it's actually come so far that that is a whole business unit in itself for Tobii. And a lot of the major brand owners in the world have eye tracking as a core tool in their toolbox when they go out and develop new products, new designs, test them all over the world with their teams and their focus groups, and then later when they roll it out live. And now, with eye tracking being more accessible to these large companies, a lot of workflows are digitized, and more of these focus groups happen in VR, especially in times like this. Then I expect that we can see eye tracking being picked up very, very natural as a key piece in these type of applications. Finally, I also want to mention some of the businesses that we've seen out there using eye tracking in explicit training. This particular case that I showed you earlier is from a live session where eye tracking is actually worn in the live case. This is from a casting plant where they have identified expert casters based on partially on their eye movements and how they focus their attention during their task. Then they identify novices who have a different type of gaze pattern and different results in the factory. And then they can combine those two together and use the experts and the visual attention of the experts as a way of teaching novices how to perform the tasks in a more efficient way and in a safer manner than previously. This is what Jacob Hamill from H&H Castings said about the experiences, and this goes a long way for the value of using these kind of technologies. And this is something that we quite often see moving into XR as well, having large, expensive, and potentially dangerous environments being reproduced in VR and used in teaching. So this is an area where I know that we have a lot of interest for eye tracking, and I see the combination of eye tracking moving into XR and a proven footprint in that market being very, very interesting to see how that takes off over the next quarters and years. And again, going back to the developers and practitioners out there, there is a lot of inspiration. There is a lot of know-how in these areas, and we have tried to accumulate what we have at Tobii and share it as openly as possible. This talk today is part of that, and we also have a lot of material on our dev zone and our business unit for analytics and behavioral studies. Tobii Pro has a lot of know-how about how eye tracking is applied in those kind of areas as well. Here is a little resource list with some of the texts or some of the material that I shared during this presentation. Grab a screenshot or ping out in the chat afterwards. And with that, I want to thank you very much for joining me here today, and looking forward to seeing you all soon in real life or in VR out there.